masque complet pendant le... Si tu peux aller chercher un truc où on peut se laver les mains à l'entrée.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to bid you all a very warm welcome to our conference on the EU facing the pandemic from crisis to collective action. I hope you can hear me well from wherever you are, at home, in your office. So today we have the launch event of the 21st edition of Social Policy in the European Union, State of Play 2020 this year. It's also indeed the 22nd time that we present our book, which is being co-produced, as you know, between the European Social Observatory and the European Trade Union Institute. It's the first time that we present it online for obvious reasons, and I think quite a few among you, looking at the list of participants for today, remember last year's memorable event on the 12th of March 2020, which was probably the last conference to take place in Brussels before the lockdown the next day. At that conference on the 12th of March 2020, Philippe Pochet from ETUI said that tomorrow we will wake up in another world and it will never be the same. Now, I think some of us might have thought that Philippe was overplaying things. He was being a bit gloomy. I think in retrospect, as happened before, Philippe, you could not have been more accurate. So this is why we are now today gathering, at least with a few of us, in a hybrid room at the European Trade Union Institute and the European Trade Union Confederation in Brussels. I can reassure you it may not look like that from the screen because the cameras are quite specific, but we are perfectly distant from each other, of course wearing masks whenever we are not talking, so I can reassure you also in this respect. And thank you to ETUI for their hospitality and making all this technically possible. I am very happy that this book came off the printer just a few days ago. You see it from a bit far, but it is now, since 3 minutes, it is now online, so you can check it out there. I'm very happy it's done. Like every year, writing a book, preparing a book in 2 languages within a few months is a very big task, but it's done. And so I want to really also seize the opportunity to thank my 2 co-editors who are behind me. You can't really see them, you will see them later, Slavina and Boris, but also the in total 15 authors who contributed with their contributions in this edition. Not so many chapters, but there were quite a lot of co-author chapters. And then of course, all these people who helped to make it possible, from the reviewers to the layouters and the people who helped out. So you will see their names in the acknowledgement section. I want to be very brief in my introduction, so I'll just remind you as today's moderator that things are of course a little bit different now than when we would gather in a physical room. What is the same is that we have interpretation, like always, just to remind you. Pour les francophones parmi nous, les bienvenus également, bien sûr, dans la langue de Voltaire. Il y a de l'interprétation anglais-français. There is interpretation, voilà, ça a été confirmé, merci beaucoup. Donc il y a de l'interprétation et donc j'appelle aussi aux orateurs qui souhaitent... Pardon? So you would prefer that I continue in English, right? I will continue in English, thank you very much. So I would like to invite the speakers who wish to express themselves in French to do so. Second practical point, there is a Q&A function in Zoom. I would really warmly welcome you to use it. We will try to pick up at least some questions during the discussion or before or after. So just to draw your attention to this Q&A possibility. And then finally, especially to the speakers, of course, normally we would have a half a day or even a full day like we had last year in March. Now we only have 2.5 hours, so I want to apologize to the speakers. You'll need to be very short, to the point. I will have to stick you to your speaking time, but then again, people will be able to read this book afterwards to find out all of the any details they would need to know about. Voilà, je vais me taire déjà là. Je passe maintenant la parole à Philippe Pochet. I don't understand this, but okay, so I should apparently not speak French, is that the thing? And then I will hear it. Ok, c'est comme ça, il n'y a aucun souci. Je voudrais juste maintenant souhaiter le bienvenue à Philippe Pochet, directeur général à l'Institut syndical européen. Et voilà, Philippe, c'est donc la 21e fois qu'on a produit ce livre ensemble. Et je te passe la parole pour ta petite introduction. Merci beaucoup, Philippe.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Effectivement, comme a dit Bart, on a organisé dans ces locaux, au premier étage, le 12 mars, la dernière conférence physique de l'Institut. On était sans doute parmi les derniers à Bruxelles à en faire encore une. Et presque un an après, c'est la deuxième fois qu'on fait un réunion hybride avec très peu de gens dans la salle, puisque nous voulons absolument respecter toutes les règles et les précautions qui doivent être prises. Et effectivement, terminant mon exposé l'année passée en disant on rentre dans un nouveau monde, je pense que j'avais vu juste, mais je n'avais pas prévu que ce monde aurait été si chaotique, si difficile à en sortir, si incertain par rapport au futur qui nous sera donné dans quelques mois lorsque, comme nous l'espérons tous, les vaccins auraient été administrés et on reviendra à une vie plus normale. Donc ce nouveau monde est aussi une opportunité de regarder qu'est-ce qui se fait ou qu'est-ce qui est en train de se faire au niveau européen. Et je pense que l'année passée, nous avions dit dans ce 20e anniversaire du bilan social qu'il y avait là quelques perspectives qui s'ouvraient, qu'on était depuis déjà quelques années, mais de façon un peu plus accélérée, devant un changement, pas un changement radical, mais un changement certain. Et pour moi, le fait qu'il y a une proposition sur le salaire minimum et la négociation collective est certainement un des éléments importants de ce changement, même si on sait toutes les critiques qu'on peut y apporter, mais qui aurait pensé il y a 10 ans ou il y a 20 ans qu'on aurait une proposition de la Commission, qu'on pourrait en discuter de façon sérieuse. Donc ce changement, ce nouveau monde qui s'ouvre à nous, de façon, comme je l'ai dit, chaotique, fait que notre modèle social, notre modèle économique, notre futur, qu'est-ce que nous voulons comme type de croissance, qu'est-ce que nous voulons pour les soins de santé, qu'est-ce que la société future, quels sont les éléments. Je pense que c'est tout ça qui a sous-jacent au bilan. Alors le bilan, comme l'on s'indique, est effectivement... Maintenant, ça fait 21 fois que je fais le bilan, 8 fois du côté de l'Observatoire, 13 fois du côté de l'Institut. On fait l'inventaire de ce qui s'est passé, mais on voit bien que là, on est devant le changement ou de possibles changements importants. Les changements sont importants, mais les risques sont importants aussi. Et je pense que c'est aussi ce moment-ci qui nous devons être particulièrement attentifs, parce que autant nous voyons, et c'est dans le bilan qui a été préparé par l'Observatoire, les différentes contributions indiquent les lueurs d'espoir, autant on voit aussi les signes par-ci par-là, pas encore dominants, et on n'espère jamais dominants, mais que le retour à l'austérité, retour en disant mais nous ne serons pas supportés des dettes aussi importantes, il faut un peu de réalisme, où est-ce qu'on va devoir couper après cette générosité soi-disant de générosité pour certains secteurs? Est-ce qu'on ne doit pas revenir à plus de réalisme? Donc, en un mot, comme en 100, ce qui était aussi l'introduction de notre benchmarking cette année, le retour à l'austérité est un risque qu'il faut éviter. Pour ça, je pense que c'est le rôle des acteurs. L'Institut, évidemment, travaille avec la Confédération européenne des syndicats qui dans ce jeu d'acteurs est extrêmement important, mais c'est aussi, et je terminerai par là, une des spécificités du bilan, des différentes contributions, de ne pas simplement analyser les politiques, ce qui a été fait parfois, qu'est-ce qui pourra en sortir pour l'année suivante, mais aussi de s'intéresser aux acteurs, parce qu'effectivement, s'il y a un changement, ça ne pourra se faire que par des coalitions d'acteurs qui seront à même de pousser des idées, de pousser ce nouveau narratif pour une société différente de celle qu'on a eue les décennies précédentes. Chaotique, peut-être pas aussi chaotique le monde que ce qu'on vit aux États-Unis pour le moment, mais certainement chaotique. Quelques espoirs, mais les acteurs sont essentiels et c'est un plaisir d'avoir fait ce bilan 21 fois et peut-être 22 avec l'Observatoire. Merci à tous et à toutes.
Many thanks for your kind words, Philippe, and for trusting us with this flagship book between our two institutes. Very happy, of course, to hear talk about a 22nd book. We shall see. Thanks also for setting the scene for debate and raising some key issues already, including your clear warning about the return to austerity, a topic that I think we will get back to, and that I suppose certainly rings or resonates with Luca Visentini, who is with us this afternoon. Luca, as you know, is General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation. I understand, Luca, that you have an important meeting this afternoon, so you can unfortunately not stay with us for the panel discussion, but I also know that you found it important to share your thoughts and encouragements for our meeting. So please, for about 5 minutes, Luca, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bart, and thank you very much to the European Social Observatory and the ETUI, and of course, the researchers and the editors that have made this publication possible, for also holding this presentation that I think is a very good opportunity for discussion. Your publication really addresses the major challenges that we have in front of us when it comes to redesigning our European social model after COVID. But as you rightly point out in the book, this redesigning exercise about rethinking what social protection and social policy should be in the European Union already started at least a couple of years ago, if not even far back in the past. We have to recognize, thanks to the big change that the previous European Commission, in comparison to the Barroso times, the Commission of Jean-Claude Juncker, the great change that they pushed forward when it comes to social policy in the European Union, because we cannot forget that after more than 15 years of no legislation, no initiatives on social policy in the European Union, and even on the contrary, horrible austerity policies, the Juncker Commission restarted a process for a fairer European Union that should protect people, as Jean-Claude Juncker was repeating all the time. And this was then substantiated, I will say, in, first of all, the European Pillar of Social Rights. That was a turning point, I will say, a key game changer in the picture, but also through more than 30 European legislative initiatives in the social field. So this change comes from far away in the past, I will say, at least 3 years back in the past. And this push for a new social Europe was then picked up also by Ursula von der Leyen when she started her mandate in 2019. And she immediately announced, we all remember, the 3 big pillars on which her mandate should have been based: green, digital, and social. Also picking up the commitment of the Juncker Commission in implementing the European Pillar of Social Rights and relaunching even further with the proposal for an action plan. So all the elements, I will say, all the background for a new social policy for the European Union were there when then the horrible COVID pandemic hit the European Union and the rest of the world. And of course, unfortunately, in a negative manner, also COVID was a game changer and is still a very important game changer in this respect, because it has changed the paradigms, I would say, in many, many fields that are related to social policy. The first and most emergent one, I would say, is the one linked to the unemployment emergency that we are facing when it comes to the COVID consequences. We face at the moment a situation in which more than 20 million European workers became already now unemployed because of COVID. And more than 40 million workers are still suspended from work and benefiting, fortunately, of different kinds of employment compensation, employment support, income support measures. And there are many other million of people, especially non-standard workers, seasonal workers, self-employed, bogus self-employed, people in the black labor market that unfortunately even don't benefit from all this. So there is really a TikTok bomb ready to explode in terms of unemployment in the European Union if the emergency measures that the European Union institutions have put in place will not be prolonged and made more universal. And rightly so, your book points out the fact that if we don't rethink the way we respond to shocks when it comes to employment and unemployment, it will be very difficult to face this emergency properly, also in the medium and long term. The other element that was really a game changer in terms of the consequences of COVID is the fact that for the first time ever, after years and years of discussion, the European Union took decisions that were absolutely unprecedented. Decided to put the debt together, to mutualize it together, to issue Eurobonds after years and years of discussions with no conclusion in this respect. There was finally a political decision, despite of the frugals trying to stop it, etc. But then it's there. And we have to say the Commission was really ambitious in this respect to push forward this proposal in the right direction. And there is also a recovery and resilience plan that is based on, again, green, digital, and social. There are still gaps and problems, of course, in making all this really implementable in practice, I mean, on the ground, because of the different ideas that exist between the different member states. But still, we have a completely different scenario if we compare it to the one we had before COVID and even earlier. So we need really to catch these opportunities. Although we are in an horrible situation, in a dramatic and tragic situation, let's try at least not to come back to business as usual. Let's try not to back to normal. We don't have to build up another normal. We have, on the contrary, to completely redesign our economic and social model. And this is exactly the challenge that we have in front of us for the future. In your book, you rightly point out also that there are many legislative and political initiatives announced and going on already in some cases in this context. The fact that the Portuguese presidency has announced this important Porto Summit to have a joint commitment between institutions, European and national institutions and social partners on the action plan for the implementation of the pillar is a great shot in the European social policy, but also some legislative initiatives like the one on minimum wages and collective bargaining, and the other ones that have been announced regarding pay transparency. Missing, by the way, this is a big problem, and we are denouncing exactly during these hours as the ETUC, but then on platform work, on non-standard workers, making sure that our social protection systems can be really resilient, universal, and adequate in the future. This is really the challenge for redesigning our social policy, for redesigning our social model, and to put back on track also some reforms of of our economic and social governance to have finally rid of austerity policies and really build up a fairer Europe for everybody. And this was, by the way, also the slogan of the Congress of the ETUC 1.5 years ago, a fairer Europe for workers. So all these elements are really part of your book. So in this respect, for the trade union movement, let me tell you, your analysis are really a fundamental tool, a fundamental background that will really help us in delivering our policy in a better way. So thank you very much again for this impressive work you have delivered. And thank you very much again for having provided us with this very important supporting tool. Thank you. And congratulations for your book.
Thank you so much, Luca. If we would be in a live audience now, I would ask for a round of applause for your warm, welcoming, and supportive words there. And to be honest, the fact that you have clearly already, even if the book is so fresh, just a few days, you have clearly had a very good look at it. This is our biggest reward, because of course we write it for policymakers, for practitioners. We hope that people like yourselves pick it up and simply start working with it. So thank you very much for that endorsement. Also for reminding us of the essential building blocks that indeed the Juncker Commission laid out. We would have one could easily forget actually that 2019, which is also covered by this year's edition, in addition to the first half of 2020, was actually a very fruitful year for EU social policy making. And this is something that you will really read in Karen Anderson's and Elke Heinz's chapter in the book, and we will hear Karen in a moment. Thanks for also reminding us that maybe in social terms, unfortunately, and in labor market terms, the worst is yet to come. And at the same time, you reminded us of the unprecedented decisions that have been tabled by the European Commission. All of these are topics. Oliver Röpke, who is president of the workers group of the European Economic and Social Committee, topics that are being scrutinized also in your committee. Oliver, in the past few years, you've always welcomed us in your premises at the EESC for a big conference with a nice drink at the end. Unfortunately, this is not the case now. Let's see when we can get back there at some place, but it's still good to have you with us online. So also from your end, please, your introductory words for about 5 minutes. Thank you, Oliver.
Yes, thanks a lot, Bart, and good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for having me with you today. I can only underline what already Luca said. This is really an important debate and an important event, and we would have liked also this year to invite you and to host your conference at the EESC. As you said, unfortunately, this is not possible, but I can promise you that we will do our utmost to host you again, and also our friends from ETUC and the other trade unions here in the EESC. Bart, you have said, or many of you mentioned, that the world turned into chaos in 2020, and I think we would probably all believe that the new year couldn't get any worse than the past, but unfortunately, this has already been proved as a fallacy, as we saw an insurrection and attempted coup incited by a president in the United States and physical attacks on the US Parliament. This was, of course, shocking and unprecedented for all of us, but I think the path leading to this has been prepared over the past 4 years, and it is apparent today where the spread of hatred and the disregard for fundamental democratic and ethical values, and I would like to add for social values, lead. And I'm convinced that several conclusions can be drawn from this, also for Europe, because we are not so far removed from the United States, and I think moral superiority of Europe is not appropriate. But the incredible pictures from Washington must also serve as a warning signal for Europe that we are also facing an increasing division and polarization of our societies and the rise in exclusion of certain social groups. And this is an ideal breeding ground for unscrupulous populists and must be combated with determination. And this is first of all about safeguarding fundamental rights and the rule of law in the EU, or to give a new push for European democracy, as the Commission President pointed out in her political guidelines at the beginning of her term of office. But in the end, the struggle for democratic values is always linked with the struggle for social rights. And as Luca already said, the Juncker Commission, as well as the new Commission, have launched some important initiatives to address the growing social imbalance in the EU and give a new push for social Europe. And I can assure you that the workers group in the EESC has explicitly welcomed these efforts and is constantly making concrete proposals for the implementation of the social pillar. Because I think this is key from our point of view, implementing the social pillar concretely with tangible improvements for working people. This is also the best contribution to Europe's recovery, because there can't be no economic recovery, I hope we agree on this, without a social recovery. This is also one of the lessons we have learned from the financial crisis, where this principle has been severely neglected. And as it was mentioned before, this book, this flagship book, clearly underlines and addresses the important challenges and also underlines the first enormous social costs of the COVID crisis. And as Luca said already, I think Europe, in this case, after this crisis and during this crisis, Europe has helped reduce the social costs through the SURE mechanism in order to support short-time work compensation, to avoid a total disaster at our labor markets, but also through the relaxation of budget rules, in particular the suspension of the Stability and Growth Pact, in order to allow member states to take all necessary measures to protect healthcare and also to protect their economies. And first of all, through the new EU budget and the next generation EU Recovery Fund, even if the final agreement diverges significantly from the Commission's original proposal, I think it's a major success that for the first time in its history, the EU will borrow from capital markets on a very large scale to finance expenditure throughout the Union. And all those instruments were instruments of solidarity, and they were the right answers to the crisis, as your book also rightly explains. I think now we have to turn to the next chapter, and I'm happy that at this crucial moment, Portugal has taken over the EU presidency. The Portuguese government has made an extremely important commitment to social Europe, and I welcome very much the clear announcements of Prime Minister Antonio Costa, but also of Labour Minister Ana Mendes Godinho, that the focus will be on a concrete action plan to implement the social pillar. And we also expect that we as a workers group can actively contribute to the ideas and also to the social summit in Porto in May. So, as you rightly said in the book, also, let's take this crisis as a window of opportunity for economic and social progress in Europe. And just to finish, only a couple of keywords. What do we expect from the action plan? First of all, we expect a clear political commitment from the member states, the social partners, and civil society to swift implement the pillar. This is the next step from proclamation to implementation. And I think the action plan itself must set targets as concrete as possible and to be implemented at all political levels. This includes stronger binding minimum standards, including social protection system, and as a strengthening of national unemployment insurances in the sense of upward convergence. You wrote in your book that there are proposals or ideas on the table. We also in our committee have adopted an opinion proposing a gradual approach for stronger joint and common minimum standards for the national unemployment systems. I think initiatives for stronger macroeconomic automatic stabilizers at European level must be always accompanied by social policy initiatives. And the very last word, I think it must not remain an empty declaration that the Green Deal must also be a social deal. And for this, we need a strong mandatory workers' voice in our European companies. So our proposals also on the table, we're fully supporting the position and the demands of the ETUC as always, and we are happy to discuss them further on again with the Commission and also with the upcoming Portuguese presidency, and I hope they will be taken up within the action plan. Thanks again to ETUI and also for today's important event, and good luck for the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for your kind words, for underlining the important work of the European Economic and Social Committee on these topics, in these areas, and also for underlining the importance of the European Pillar of Social Rights and its actual implementation. We will have later on representatives from the European Commission, but also from the Portuguese presidency. So we will certainly revisit these issues. On the Green Deal, we'll have a separate seminar on the 28th of January, to which you will be invited as well. So thank you, Luca, Oliver, Philippe, for your welcoming words. By now we have around 200 participants online, apparently. So this is the time, I would say, to switch to the main dish, or the main substantive dish, at least. And I would, without further ado, like to invite Karen Anderson to take the floor. Karen is Associate Professor at University College Dublin. So up to you to kick off with the first chapter of our book. I should just like to remind the audience that you co-authored it with your colleague Elke Heins, and I'm happy to have that we have both of you with us today, even though you will be presenting the book. So the floor is yours for maximum 15 minutes, Karen, and after when you have about 5 minutes left, I will start moving around. And when you have about 1 minute left, I will just start shouting. The floor is yours, please. Karen, please.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. I'll share my screen in just a moment. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me, but we did the sound check, so everything should be fine. So thanks, first of all, for the invitation. And said this is a co-authored, equally co-authored chapter for the book, and I have the pleasure of presenting it. So I'll share my screen now and give you the highlights of the chapter. Okay, here we go. So I'm from the School of Social Policy, Social Work and Justice. This is from at University College Dublin. Elke Heins is from the School of Social Science in the Social Policy section at the University of Edinburgh. And as you know, ours is the sort of kickoff of the book. And both Elke and I have been studying, researching, teaching European social policy for 10 or 20 years. So we've been following developments quite closely for a long time. So we are very happy to have the opportunity to write the chapter for this book. So let me give you an outline of what I will be talking about in the next 10 or 12 minutes. So we had a brief, we had a sort of instructions or suggestions about what to cover in the book. And the framing context of the book is of the chapter, sorry, is political. It's the 2019 European elections and the selection of a new commission headed by Ursula von der Leyen. Now, when Elke and I started writing the chapter, the COVID-19 pandemic was in its early stages, so nobody really knew what was going to happen. So we were following a moving target in some ways, but we developed our analysis on the basis of the changing political context and how COVID-19 has affected it. So I'll say a few words about that. I'll review the achievements and setbacks in social policy making at the EU level in 2019 and 2020. And luckily, Bart and his co-author have updated those that review in their chapter in the book. And then I'll say a few words about the prospects for social Europe. Now, I want to start out with our key analytical points, which is an optimistic take on the prospects for EU social policy making since the European elections and the installation of the new commission. So to paraphrase Mark Twain, our main point is that the reports of the social Europe are greatly exaggerated. We know, those of us who work in European social policy or study it or teach it or do research about it, the starting point is always that the treaty basis for social policy at the EU level remains weak, but there's been lots of progress in fits and starts over the last many decades for a variety of reasons that have been extensively analyzed in the literature. And so we pick up on that. Type of analysis, and we argue that the pro-EU majority in the European Parliament, elected in 2019, this is a really important fact, it's a pro-EU majority, and the partisan composition and ownership of the Commission, led by von der Leyen, have the potential to prepare the ground for more social policy activity, a reinvigoration of social Europe, rooted in the expanded use of both soft coordination, so the open method of coordination, soft law instruments, and hard law, legislation, directives, regulations, in pursuit of a wider set of goals, especially climate justice. So we're optimistic about social Europe. We see important reasons to be optimistic. This has to do with agenda setting by the Commission, and it has to do with a crisis response so far, which previous speakers have already touched on, and coming speakers will also go into more detail about. So it's really, really important that the Commission agenda for social policy, or for the EU program as a whole, it focuses on climate justice, because climate justice and the future of environmental sustainability, this is a really important of well-being, of individual well-being, of the well-being of regions and communities and countries. So it's an important part of social policy, and it's an opportunity. Okay, so let me say a few words about the 2019 European elections, and I'm very aware that nearly all of the people listening to the presentation know quite a bit about the European elections and how they played out. But just to reiterate what the background is. The elections in May 2019 took place in a very, very difficult, contentious context, because Brexit was in the background and Euroscepticism was increasing almost everywhere in the European Union. So there was a lot of fear, and rightly so, that the European elections deliver a result that would be disappointing to pro-social Europe groups. But the result was historic in two ways. First, there was high turnout. So for the first time ever, turnout actually increased. And then a second historic aspect was that the European People's Party and the S&D group lost their dominance in Parliament. They're still the largest group. They no longer together form a majority. So this shakes up decision-making in the European Parliament, and that has implications for social policy making. The other aspect of the result is that there is now increased polarization within the European Parliament, because on the two sides of the political spectrum, at least if we look at, if we say that the political spectrum is left-right political spectrum, the Green parties gained and the right-wing populists gained. So there's some polarization. So let's take a look at the composition of the Parliament as it stands right now. This is after the UK members of Parliament have left. So there are 704 members. And you can see the distribution here and get a sense of the relative size of different party groups in the Parliament as, you know, in terms of their share of those 704 seats. But the key point again is that the two groups that formed a sort of de facto grand coalition in the past, S&D and the EPP, they've lost their majority. Now this is not necessarily thing, as long as the center can also attract support from other party groups. Okay, so a couple more words on the effects or the implications of this result in the European elections of 2019. Now, the left-right dimension remains salient. This is the way that most of us think about the European Parliament. It goes from left to right, and we can place the parties along that spectrum. But there's another cleavage or line of conflict or dimension, and that's the pro-anti dimension. And so we have to look at the way that these two lines of conflict or dimensions, how they intersect. You can have left, right, you can have a strong sort of center left, but if they're not pro-EU, if members of those political groupings are not pro-EU, then this does not bode well for European social policy making. But the key points really are that these centripetal forces, this kind of these pressures to move to the center, make it difficult to form stable majorities in the European Parliament. We don't know what this will mean in the long term, but it does mean that it's a bit more difficult to form stable coalitions. And we don't really know how this will play out specifically in the future for the green digital agenda, which is so important for the current Commission and for advocates of European, a social Europe that is green. Okay, now what has the Commission?
You have 5 minutes left now, okay?
5 minutes left, okay.
Yes, 5 minutes left.
So what has the von der Leyen? Yeah, okay. Feel free to interrupt. It's no problem. The von der Leyen Commission, what has it promised? As previous speakers and future speakers will tell you, the centerpiece is the European Green Deal and a just transition to go along with that. A jobs-oriented social market economy, a new gender equality strategy covered in the book, and a renewed commitment to the European pillar of social rights. There's also been some sort of institutional engineering on the part of von der Leyen's to improve relations with the European Parliament and other EU institutions. The idea that there should be 3 executive vice presidents and 5 vice presidents, to sort of smooth the coordination, improve cooperation, and improve the prospects for a successful delivery of this very ambitious agenda. Now, what are the achievements that have been made despite this shock of the COVID-19 pandemic? As I've already mentioned, the pandemic really overshadowed the social policy agenda, but it also led to new opportunities, as other speakers have already mentioned, this idea of, the crisis response as an opportunity to reorder social and economic policy. And some of that has already happened. With the European Pillar of Social Rights action plan has put the agenda. It has not been realized yet, but it's definitely on the agenda. Some existing accomplishments are the Next Generation European Recovery Plan, SURE scheme to support like short-time work, for example, in the member states, and a reinvigoration of social partnership, for example, in the framework agreement on digitalization, and then more resources going to the youth guarantee, which has been around, has been in existence for since 2013. But you see, as several speakers have already mentioned, new resources being put into the crisis response measures, and then a kind of revamping or reinvigoration of existing initiatives like the Pillar of Social Rights. Now, if we turn to the sort of everyday policy making in terms of social policy, we also see a mix of hard law and soft law being used to advance social Europe, a directive on transparent and predictable working conditions, a recommendation on access to social protection for workers and the self-employed. The work balance directive has entered into force. We have a new institution that has been set up and is running now, and it is the European Authority. And then we have the mobility package, which is aimed at the transportation sector. So these are a mix of new initiatives and old initiatives, a mix of hard law, soft law, and institution building. But this all plays out against the background of the European Parliament and the European Commission and the Council that make the decisions about what the social policy measures will look like and whether they will have any teeth. Now, the main setback has been the failure to agree on an update of the regulation on the coordination of social security schemes. Now, in the interests of time, I won't go over any of these details. The point here is simply that this is an absolutely essential element of EU law. So it's not surprising that it might be contentious. It needs to be updated in light of changing labor markets and patterns of mobility, etc. And now turning to my conclusions with Elke Heinz, we see considerable progress despite the shock of the COVID pandemic and what it means in terms of economic performance and social dislocation. And we make a strong argument that the partisan composition of the European Parliament and the agenda and entrepreneurship of the von der Leyen Commission are preconditions that are favorable to a reinvigoration of social Europe. I've talked about some of the signs that we're already seeing here. And it is really, really important that the social policy aspects of climate change and digitalization are central elements of this overall strategy. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions and comments later on.
Thank you so much, Karen, and of course, Elke, for this very nice overview, very concise. Also, thank you for sticking to this very tough timeline. Karen, highlighting the key messages. I would say it's quite an optimistic reading of what happened, as you said yourself, an optimistic reading of what has happened at the EU level with regard to social policy in the past 1.5 years. And it is also clear from when you listed that indeed a lot has been achieved. There have, of course, been a number of setbacks, which you also underlined. And I think this is a very good basis also for the discussion afterwards, for the panel discussion, to see whether this optimistic start of the book whether other people agree with that analysis as well. There is for now only one question. There was one question in the Q&A, namely somebody asked how to get the book. This has been answered. You can download it from the EU ETUI, download it or order it from the ETUI website. And I would like to also reach out to you for those in the audience who would like to pop a question. Please use the Q&A function. Now, I would like to turn without further ado, and let's see if there are questions for you and Elke. Karen, I will get back to you at a later stage very briefly. But now I want to turn to the next chapter in the book, which has been written by Martin Myant. Martin, as many of you know, is associate researcher in this institute, where we are physically today. Your chapter, Martin, deals with the economic and social consequences of COVID-19, a very big and a very heavy topic to some extent. And we look forward, good to have you on board, Martin, and we look forward to your key messages in the next 15 minutes. And as was the case with Karen, and as will be the case with the other speakers, if you have about 5 minutes left, I will just stand up. And when you have 1 minute left, I will please ask you to kindly wrap it up. So please, Martin, the floor is yours.
Good. I hope you can all hear me, and I hope the screen is shared. Is that right?
Yes, we can hear you, and the screen is shared. Go ahead, Martin.
Okay, well, what I've done for the chapter It was finished at the start of September. There's plenty to update, so I'm going to say slightly different things from what are in it. What I do is I cover the first measures, the economic and social consequences, and EU initiatives. The first measures, if we remember back to then, was to do whatever it takes to control this pandemic, which meant strict lockdown measures, economic support measures to preserve firms and jobs, and to prevent social catastrophe. And we'll see how we pay for it later. And the hope, and astonishingly the belief of some, was that it would be a V-shaped depression. It will go down and then come up again, and we can all live reasonably happily ever after. Now, what I've used to measure it is the Blavatnik index from the Blavatnik School of Government in Oxford University. It's imprecise. If you want to know how it works, you will have to look in the chapter in the book and follow the links to their enormous website. But what they do is they have from 0 to 100 a measure of how strict measures are in terms of containment measures and economic support measures. I've taken an EU average from the beginning of March through till the end of November. And we can see the containment measures increase fairly rapidly throughout the first month or so. From the middle of April, they're beginning to relax them in some countries, and the line comes down to a minimum point around about the 1st of July. If they hoped that it would then continue going down, that proved to be unfounded. We jog along at a level for a time, and then from the end of October, it increases again. Support measures seem to be more stable. That's partly deceptive because support is only given when containment makes it necessary. So that just tells us that the measures were in place. It doesn't tell us how much was actually spent. But as we can see, the potential for giving support remains quite substantial throughout. Now, to see the economic cost, what I've taken is GDP, quarterly figures, 2020 compared with 2019. I've picked on a few countries that represent different kinds of performances, and the European Union is in the middle. And as we can see, it's already falling for the EU average in the first quarter with the beginnings of lockdown measures. It falls by almost 14% in the second quarter, and then it's back to a fall of under 5% come the third quarter. And you've got countries that have done apparently very well, Poland and Sweden, countries that are a little bit better than the European Union, maybe, Germany and Czechia, and then ones that look substantially worse, Greece, France, and Spain. Greece didn't look bad at first. It's really the third quarter that pulls them down. So there are differences between countries, but overall, you might say, despite this being in economic terms pretty dreadful, it's not as bad as might have been expected. In fact, it's not that far off European Commission forecasts from early on, which they said were being pretty optimistic. If the fourth quarter had been back to the previous year's level, we'd have had a fall over the year as a whole of only 5%. It'll be a bit worse than that, but it won't be all that much worse. Evidently, they thought they'd learned to live with the virus, and this proves not to be the case. Now, before going further, a few reservations about the GDP indicator. We all know it's not a perfect measure of welfare. It's boosted by new health activities, so a whole lot of things being done make GDP look better. It's not reduced if public sector workers are prevented from doing very much, but are still being paid. And it doesn't show if people are having to do more work, as an awful lot are, both in their jobs and at home, without being paid for it. So it's not a precise measure. And if we want to see when do we get back to normal, it won't be when the GDP indicator has come back to no decline relative to 2019. but we need to follow it by the different sectors. And incidentally, when we do, we can see quite a lot of why some countries have done better than others. The Poland and Sweden, the containment measures were not as strict as elsewhere, and the sectoral structure is particularly unfavorable in some of the others. So that's simply repeats what is there. So I then took 5 different economic sectors to see how they behaved and see whether we get a V out of them. I've got up at the top retail, and it's not that big a drop, and it's back to above the 2019 level before long. We all continued to buy things, even if we bought a lot of things in a different way. So that figure conceals a lot of problems for some employees and businesses. Construction also comes back almost to where it was before relatively quickly. In fact, construction wasn't locked down at all in a number of countries. And the reason why it hasn't recovered is depressed investment in some cases. So those 2 would have been okay for your V shape. Then I've got motor vehicles goes down because they basically stopped production, and it's back to where it was before by October. About the only significant motor vehicle producer that isn't back to normal is Germany, but others are back to a higher level than they've been previously. And then accommodation and catering. This is an important part of high income economies. It's also an important part of ones that are heavily dependent on tourism. And so if you remember from the GDP figures, Greece looked particularly bad in the 3rd quarter, and Greece is heavily dependent on tourism, as is Spain as well. 2 countries that have great difficulty in experiencing any sort of recovery. And then I've put down at the bottom, air transport. It never seems to come back. We don't seem to be flying anywhere. So that shows us, on the one hand, how far we are from being back to normal, and on the other hand, helps to explain differences between countries. Now, can we follow social costs from this? And if we take Eurostat figures, and I've tried throughout to rely on figures from established statistical sources to make it as exact as possible, unemployment hasn't risen by that much. People we know are losing their jobs, but they're not showing through in that. And the drop in employment from labour force surveys is not that great. In a whole number of countries, it's extremely small. I've got, for the 3rd quarter, the biggest falls are Bulgaria and Spain. Obviously, not good if you're one of those people who's lost your job, but those overall, the fall in employment, there's something wrong with the figures. They're not in line with what we're expecting from other evidence. Well, I've put a number of buts to those figures that take us some way to explain it. Although there's support given to keep people in jobs, it's not universal, it's not for everyone, not in all countries. It doesn't cover all your income, or in only a few cases does it. It's time limited, although in many cases it's been extended. And in general, the lower income countries have worse support measures. And of course, they also have worse unemployment benefits and the like for if you really do lose your job. And a very strongly held view, the cost in terms of job losses have been delayed through perhaps to 2021, who knows when. But even in countries where it hasn't fallen by very much, they're saying, as these support measures disappear, we will find a massive increase in unemployment. A Eurofound survey, that was back in July, showed 37% working less hours, and some people working a lot less hours. It showed 8% have become unemployed. I've got the 2 extremes there. Spain was the highest, 16%. And Sweden the lowest, 3%. Again, oddly not showing up in figures from labour force surveys. Another big change that's happened, home working. 34% have done a certain amount of home working. And there's a very strong bias for the type of work that you do and for the country that you're in. So 74% of those with tertiary education undertaking some home working. So obviously, again, higher income countries with higher, more office work, more work for people with tertiary education, more opportunity to work from home and more opportunity to maintain your income. So my concluding point on this, some people are working much less, others are actually working much more. Some are experiencing very substantial hardship and others have money to spend later because they can't spend it all now. And that's going to have implications for where we are.
Martin, just to let you know, you have 4 or 5 minutes left at this stage.
I have 4.5 minutes, that's right.
4.5 minutes, thank
So
you.
for the state budget costs, we can follow the measures that were taken, that were announced, and the IMF updates that regularly. I've got something strange happening here. I don't know what. I can't get rid of that. So I will read it from here and hope that thing goes away. TV will turn off. I haven't got a TV on. I don't want a TV on. I'm sorry, this is falling to pieces all of a sudden. State budget costs. We can follow the measures announced, but they're not an exact measure of how much is actually spent. But it looks like very often 5% of GDP in additional spending, and automatic stabilizers in the best cases another 5%. There are also guarantees for credits, although of course we hope that the credits will be honored so they won't be required. And I then got figures for likely deficits this year. France, 11% of GDP. My screen has gone blank. Okay, I have it here. 11% of GDP. For Germany, I have 5%. And they're expecting deficits coming in the coming year as well, because they're expecting to have to continue spending, and they may even undertake various kinds of recovery programs. So there's a danger of debt increasing greatly. I've got a figure there, the debt to GDP ratio for Greece looks like 205%, way above what we were told were absolutely disastrous levels earlier on. Response from the European Union, the EU budget is of course only about 1% of its GDP, much less than member states, so it can't be the major thing. And it's very hard to get agreement to spend more. Nevertheless, there's a couple of important measures I can mention. The Stability and Growth Pact sort of suspended. We don't know for how long and we don't know what will follow. And on competition policy to allow state aid, various sort of emergency provisions. And if I look at what has been approved up to the 17th of December, it includes guarantees as well as state aid to businesses. It comes to over 5% of GDP. I put in the chapter the question of whether this will help mostly the richest countries, and it isn't really borne out by the figures there. The highest figure that I could find when adding it up was 13.6% of GDP for France, but there were very low figures also among higher income countries. So it's not clear that that has a bias in that direction. Then the most interesting measure from the European Union, the so-called Recovery and Resilience Facility. Would the European Union use its collective financial strength to raise finance for member states? There's a history of strong opposition. And this time what we have agreed to is this facility. It would be worked out exactly how much goes to what country in July of this year. But it looks like what has to be spent by the end of 2026 is equivalent to 2.4% of EU GDP. That's quite substantial. That's in line with what regional and cohesion policy had over the whole of the last budget period. And the formula shows very likely over 10% of GDP will go to 3 countries, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Greece, and a number of others not far behind. So that could be a substantial move towards overcoming the effects of this crisis and towards overcoming convergence. Questions of how it will be used, whether it can be used usefully, and whether it will set a precedent. And my conclusion, which I do dead on 15 minutes, hopefully you can read for yourselves while Bart shuts me down.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin, for your very interesting intervention, for reminding us just how far we are from normal. Sorry, I should take off my mask now.
I'm hearing nothing.
You hear nothing. Okay. Is the sound okay? Yes, it is supposed to be okay. So yes, also thank you for trying to put your fingers on the social cost of the crisis, even though it's still very early days, as we also read in your chapter. And we also appreciate your very critical discussion of the recovery and resilience fund and this initiative that is being implemented. I think it's something that we will certainly get back to. So before turning the floor now to Anniek de Ruijter, may I just point Karen and Martin that there are two questions for you in the chat, in the Q&A, sorry. There is a question: what will be the impact of the UK leaving the EU on the prospects for social Europe? Well, I'm assuming, Karen, that you might want to have a look at this question in the Q&A that will follow. Of course, if somebody else wants to comment, that's also fine. And then, Martin, there is a question from a Bella Galgozzi, which I think you know from the ETUI. At least I'm assuming it's this Bella. Bella writes in the chat, German car industry did comparably well. This is due to the Chinese market, not Germany or Europe. Can this be a sign of a longer term trend? So thank you, Bella, for this question. And the first question was from Ger Gibbons. So Karen and Martin, if you could prepare maybe these questions for the Q&A later, that would be good. Now, I would like to turn, without any further ado, to Anniek de Ruijter. I hope you're out there. Yes, I can see you. So the third chapter of our book deals with EU health policy. Extremely important topic, of course. I'm very happy that you and Ali Brooks and Scott Greer authored this together. I think that the result also, you know, in terms of interdisciplinary exchange worked very well. Anniek is professor at the University of Amsterdam. And I would like to ask you in maximum 15 minutes to highlight the key messages from your chapter. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Bart. And yes, I would like to thank the colleagues that are not here, but that I wrote this chapter with together. Is of course Scott Greer from the University of Michigan School of Public Health, who's a professor there, and Eleanor Brooks, who's a lecturer in global health policy of the University of Edinburgh, and that is in the School of Social and Political Science. So I'm myself an associate professor. I promoted rather quickly. I'm associate professor at the law faculty of the University of Amsterdam, and so my field of research has been EU health law and policy. And one of the things I have been working on for quite some time now is the EU response to major health disasters. And I was doing this really before COVID already. And so, of course, when I could not have imagined the actual fallout and the implications of such a huge health emergency. I've been writing about this, but to be honest, the reality of it has also surprised me, and I couldn't have thought it would have this type of impact. So what we from our different disciplines brought together is indeed the thinking of what will be the impact of this disease outbreak for EU health policy. And I don't have slides, so I'll just kind of outline the paper for you and the steps that I'll take in this talk as well. But before I do so, I think it's important to say a little bit about the particularity of health policy and health systems in the context of social policy. And then more specifically, what is particular about EU health policy? Now, of course, as all the participants here know, health policy is a very important aspect of the welfare states within the member states. It's a big chunk of redistribution, access to healthcare, health insurance. It involves a great deal of public funds, etc. So when you then look at from an EU perspective at health policy, you see that as it evolved in the EU, there was not a lot of political willingness of member states to let go of any kind of authority in this area, because it is important stuff for elections. It involves a great deal of redistribution, and this has been the history of health policy in the EU, that, and we've seen this, of course, generally in the social field, that there was a lack of willingness to give the EU any kind of competences, any kind of legal power to create laws and policies. Another sort of more pragmatic way of looking at that is also that the healthcare systems, as they have evolved over time, particularly also after the Second World War, are vastly different in the EU. So the way that they're organized. On top of that, there's large health inequalities across EU member states. Now, just for instance, if you just look at the average life expectancy, that is on average 80.6 years in the EU. Now, if you go to Bulgaria, that number drops to 47.7. In France and Spain, this is about 82 and 83 years. So if you look at the out-of-pocket costs of people for health services, now if you go to, for instance, Greece or the Eastern European countries, this is up to sometimes 23 or 50% of the payments that they make for their healthcare costs. Now, if you go to some of the Western Scandinavian countries, this is down to 12 to 15%. So there's really important differences across healthcare systems. And so this should tell you something about how difficult it would be for the EU to create this or to recreate some kind of a healthcare system at EU level, because an EU measure would have very different impacts. For instance, say improving the basket of care and saying, okay, now it's mandated that there is some particular healthcare provision that would that people would have a right to in all of the different member states. That the impact of such decisions would be very different across member states. So there are very important pragmatic differences there and difficulties there as well. So how did we build up our chapter? Basically, we looked at the past, then we looked at the present, which was basically what are the current measures that are being taken, and we looked at the future. So if we look at the past and the way that EU health policy has been built up, we outlined three phases of health policy in the EU. On the one hand, we have the actions on public health, and those actions include some coordinated legislation in the area of disease outbreaks, infectious disease control. The second phase is legislation in the area of the internal market that as a side effect affects health. And then the last is the phase of the fiscal governance that is much younger and that we've seen starting to develop with the introduction of the European semester, etc. So now I'll focus a little bit on the first phase of EU health policy, that is in the area of public health. Now, of course, there is not a strong European competence in the area of public health, but especially also, but basically from sort of a bottom-up process of public health institutes and experts working together Over time, these disease networks evolved where experts would work together at EU level on particular infectious diseases. Now this evolved again, and in 98, the first network decision was created where the EU would work a little bit more holistically together, coordinated on infectious disease outbreaks. What is important in the backdrop is, of course, we have the WHO. So member states are already working at international level in the WHO context. So doing it as well on EU level should have some real benefits above what is already going on in the WHO. Then in 2004, and this is in the time where an increasing understanding that we had bird flu, we had a number of major outbreaks that were scary, that we see there's a new time or dawning on us, which is sort of, what people call a little bit melodramatically the age of pandemics, that we need to beef up our capacity on infectious disease control. And here you see in 2004, you see the European Center of Disease Control that should, bring together all these more fragmented disease networks. In the backdrop as well as here is, of course, the age of bioterrorism, where we had the anthrax attacks and there was other political reasons for really trying to bring together and to work together in a more intensively in the EU. Then after the swine flu outbreak in 2009, and this is very interesting, I've studied the swine flu outbreak quite intensively, you see the same thing happening as that we see today. You see a window of opportunity, a big crisis, and the possibility to create new legislation. Now, at that time, they didn't propose legislation as quickly as they've done this time. So they waited, there was a lot of evaluation. And then after some time, there was a new decision that was drafted that has been at work right now with this COVID-19 outbreak. And this was the health threats decision. And here you see there's much more of a security approach to working together in the EU on infectious diseases. And what is important for social policy or for redistributive policies is that this was the first time there was some proposal made on public procurement of medicines, of pandemic medicines. And this created actually in the field of health, one of, besides a little bit the Patients' Rights Directive, but a lot of us, and we don't have to talk about that now, but many of us have commented that this was not the most redistributive policy that we know, but the public procurement of medicines was one of the areas where potentially there could be more redistribution at EU level. There were also obvious sort of risk sharing and efficiency benefits to be had to be procuring medicines in the case of a large outbreak together. And at the time that this was decided, everybody was afraid of a big influenza outbreak, which is something that we're still worried about. So a lot of the pre-purchase agreements, et cetera, that were made at the time were in the area of influenza.
Anniek, sorry to interrupt you, just to signal that you have 4 or 5 minutes left at this stage.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes. So now if we look at the present, we have to have that in the background. I'm not going to be talking about much about the second phase, which is the internal market phase of health policy and the fiscal governance. And I do advise you on the fiscal governance to also read the work of Rita Baten and Bart Vanhercke, of course, on the impact of the European semester in this area on health systems. But if we now look at the response and of the EU to COVID, you see that in the beginning there was hardly any coordination, and it was kind of a panic response, and the reflex was really the return to member state autonomy. This was the first response, and this also, we saw this with the closing of borders, the export bans on medical equipment. So you see there, that was the first reflex, but very quickly that changed and borders were reopened and the whole system of public procurement started to work. and many equipment was being bought at EU level. Promises were made to fund certain procurement, so like medical equipment and also for vaccines. So this actually shows quite a solidary face, which is a lot different than what happened with the swine flu outbreak, where really some member states had bought up all the vaccines and other member states were left with nothing. Now, of course, the COVID outbreak, especially with respect to vaccine, is a marked difference if you compare it to the swine flu, where there was not a very solidary response. What was very complex, though, in this COVID outbreak was that there were a lot of different systems that were working in parallel. So the civil protection system and the health system, it was all working in parallel to one another, which caused a lot of and I think that the current recent legal proposals to make that more clear, how does civil protection work together with the health security mechanisms, etc., are a very good improvement. Okay, looking at the future, because I have a lot about this, but I think it's important to look at the future. I don't think, and this is what we write about, that we will see a huge treaty change in this area, where people say you need to strike the iron when it's hot. When we look at the current health proposals, what we see is an improvement of the budget, which is quite major, right? So there used to be about 300 to 400 million euros available in the public health programs that could be redistributed to member states that needed it. Right now, there's a budget approved for 5.1 billion. So there is a huge difference there, but it's not in comparison to what is available at member states level, in comparison to the health inequalities that still exist across member states. It's also not, it's never going to be a new European healthcare system or anything in that respect. And also we don't see any kind of political will for a major treaty change to improve the EU competences in this area. What is important is on infectious diseases, there's probably going to be a little bit more executive power of the EU so that it can respond more effectively in other outbreaks. And where you see an important change is in the area of medicines. Now, medicines are expensive and access to medicines are an important aspect of healthcare systems and welfare entitlements. And here you see that increasingly there have been shortages in the past, for instance, on contraceptives, antibiotics. And right now, I think what I think is that the public procurement in the area of vaccines will open up the door for more collaboration of member states with respect to a joint procurement. Now, that is, of course, an important site for redistribution, because if the EU is buying it, it also needs to decide on how to distribute it and who can have access to it. So I think that is a site to keep our eyes on. And I think that this is only a small beginning. It's on small scale, but we cannot underestimate its importance because, as I said, healthcare is a sensitive area of social policy, and at the same time, it is a cornerstone of welfare, of the welfare state.
Thank you so much, Anniek, for a very condensed, very timely intervention on a very good chapter. For those who haven't opened the book yet online, you have three basic, very simple titles: the past, the present, the future. And I like that, and it really describes very well what happened in the past, what happens now, and what you and the co-authors think of what could happen next. Thanks for reminding us of the limited EU health competences. I think indeed in the whole discussion about what's going to happen now with Europe for Health and other initiatives, this is crucial to always underline that. And at the same time, the chapter shows very clearly that a lot has been achieved without being naive, of course, in the last few months. And we use what you and your co-authors have written in this chapter also in the conclusions to develop our idea about the crisisification of EU
social policy. So thank you very much for this, Anniek, well done. So we have a bit of time now for discussions. There are a few questions in the chat function or the Q&A function of Zoom. So I'd like to invite the speakers who haven't done so maybe to have a look at that. So there was indeed a question from Ger Gibson about the potential impact of the UK leaving the EU on prospects for social Europe. I thought that maybe Karen would like to answer this question. By the way, just to be sure if Elke Heinz is out there as well. Elke, we have sent you a link so that you can also participate in the debate. So you're very welcome to do so. There was a question also about the German car industry. I've seen, and I will sit down. I hope this the sound system will follow me while I sit down. There was a question. Il y a une question à Antoine Cazel. Peut-être, Antoine, tu peux reprendre cette question un peu plus tard pendant le panel. Donc, la question, c'est dans combien de pays le droit de retrait a-t-il été utilisé par les travailleurs pour se protéger de la pandémie, comme l'ont fait plus de 1000 conducteurs de la STIB à Bruxelles? Voilà, Antoine, you can find this question in the chat function. There is an interesting debate ongoing there between Andreas Botsch and some other people about the German car industry. We won't go too much into detail, but it's good that to see this debate going. So I don't know, who of the speakers would like to pick up on one of these questions? And I think that Philippe Pochet also had a question for a debate. So Philippe, maybe you want to fire away, and then let's see whether Karen or Martin or Anniek would like to respond to any of the issues raised in the chat. Philippe, please.
Yeah, thank you, Bart. I have three questions, and the first question are for Karen and Elke, because you present the European Parliament, you present the Commission, but very little about the member state. So where is your hope for the member state, as is classical in the political science approach? The second one, I think you didn't touch on the manifesto of the political parties, and I think perhaps it is something that has to be more analyzed. Is the Green now elected in the parliament the same Green than before, or they are more social Green, or the Socialists more social, etc.? So formally they are the same group, but perhaps not the same manifesto, or this kind of change within the parties, as we noticed that everyone was going to the right in the past. And a third question is to Martin, but to everyone. I think that I like that my question is what to measure, because we all say we should enter in the different world, but we all measure or we re-enter in the previous world. So as you said, there is less travel. Okay, perhaps it's very good, and we should have the objective to have less travel. But all the measure is to re-enter in the previous world, and very little I see in the analysis, or we enter to something very different. And if we enter, and it's kind of more general question, is perhaps measure really what is important if we think that the new paradigm should be different than the previous one.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Philippe. So there are a few questions from Karen and Elke. In the meanwhile, I also see Anniek. There is, I don't know if you have seen it, a question in the chat box or the Q&A from Patrick de Velderen from KU Leuven. Welcome in the seminar, Patrick. So he says, Anniek, do you also foresee or not foresee more collective action of the EU on the international scene in this kind of crisis, e.g. exporting our social protection, public health traditions? So this would be another question to be answered. So who in the panel, just wave your hand, would like to go first with regard to one or several of the questions that have been raised? And I also see now Elke Heinz on Zoom, so very welcome, Elke, good to have you on board. So I think, Karen, I saw your hand coming up. Please, go ahead.
I just wanted to suggest, Luca and I have been communicating sort of on the second. So I wanted to, and we already decided Elke would take the Brexit question. So I would just say, Elke, take it away, and whatever you don't answer of any of the questions, I'll pick up on.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly well. Go ahead, Elke.
Okay, so so I understand the question in the sense of, okay, what just happened to the social agenda in the EU, given that the UK was often a veto power and obstructor. So of course now this obstructing force is gone. But I think we need to be quite realistic that quite many other member states, and that partly answers also Philippe's question about the member states. I think a few countries were probably hiding behind the UK, expecting that the UK will veto something anyway. Now they can't hide anymore behind the UK. They need to now openly, bring forward their own objections against potential social measures. So I think, if it would be naive to think that now the UK is gone as a slightly awkward partner, and especially when it comes to social Europe, that things will become easier, because there will be other member states who do have their issues for various reasons. I suppose to continue with the question on member states, so Philippe's question, it's an interesting year ahead, I think, with the German elections. I don't know which other member states have elections, but obviously, so Europe is always at the balance, and social Europe as well. So I think what will be interesting to see is also in respect to COVID, how, at the moment it looks quite uniform, it looks quite positive. I mean, a lot of money is clearly, put into the system, but at one point, somebody has to pay for it. And that's when it becomes really interesting. And then I think member states and governments will sort of show their real face. So it's probably a question a bit more for the future. So Karen, I think you wanted to answer the question about the ELA.
In Labour Authority. Yes, briefly, please. Thank you.
Yes, the European Labour Authority. That's a really good question. And it's a question that has to do with sort of institution building, right? So it's a new agency. It's located in Bratislava. It's been in the works for a couple of years. And it's like other measures, it's responding to changes in labor, right? What does labor mobility mean when there are a bunch of new member states? What does it mean when their mobile working is easier because of digitalization and all kinds? So it exists to provide it streamlines existing activities and improves them, so there is added value, I would argue, but it's a new institution, so it's really too early to tell how sharp its teeth are going in the future. But if you think about being a mobile worker and needing access to what the law says about your employment rights and your social protection, things like your paid leave, your salary, what should your contract work look like, there's a lot of gaps in what mobile workers know, and there's a lot of abuse. And so the ELA has been set up to try to improve the information environment to help people secure their rights if they are mobile workers. But again, it's too early to tell. And then if I could just follow some of the things that Elke said, the Netherlands is having an election pretty soon. And here we have to worry about this, Eurosceptic sort of line of conflict. Because of Dutch politics, we have to worry about, the Netherlands being one of the frugal four. And so even though it's a much smaller country than Germany, for example, that election will have implications probably for the future of social policy making because of the composition of the council. So so that's kind of, it may be not a satisfying answer to Philippe, but obviously domestic politics drives what's going on in the council. So we have to keep our eye on domestic politics. I can't really say much about the party. Sorry?
No, just
okay.
if you could just, very briefly
I can't
wrap
really
up.
say much.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I can't say much about the party manifestos because it's not my research, but I can say just 2 sentences maybe. We know that sort of policy content in this group, in the party grouping, European Parliament, it's not as sharp and clear as it is in domestic politics, right? Because these are coalitions of different national parties. So that means there may be some policy dilution, but it also means there may be opportunities for coalition building. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karen. Anniek, I would like to turn to you. There was this question, you've probably seen them in the Q&A from Patrick de Veltre about the international dimension of EU health and social protection policies. And then a new question came up from Simon Moors, who is a public health professional. And I'll let you simply introduce the question and you can maybe explain what the EU agency HERA is, because not all of us may know what it is. Please, Anniek, the floor is yours. Just briefly, please.
Yeah, so I didn't know that. So I kind of started answering also with typing. So the question by Patrick was indeed, so what do we expect for an EU global health agenda, basically? And we had an EU global health agenda in 2010, and that kind of died a quiet death, if I may say so. And in the current plans of the presidencies, this plan is back, or it's in different form, but we do see that we need to work that, first of all, the relationships between the WHO Euro and the European Union need to be carved out a little bit more. And the EU has played an important part, of course, in the WHO's responses, vaccine procurement and all of that. Especially, with the current role of the US also in the WHO. And so that's this, and there I think where an important, we see, of course, that the EU is now creating new types of trade agreements where development goals are much more linked up within these trade agreements. And I think there is an important site for more global, for a larger EU global health agenda that can actually make a difference. Because I think generally an EU global health agenda is good in a normative sense, but to be honest, I wouldn't expect no earth moving kind of results from that, given the important role of the WHO in that respect as well. So that's kind of my answer to that. And there was also a question by Simone, indeed, the HERA. So this is an idea that is now put forward to create a new agency in comparison to the EU BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. So this is basically a way to very quickly pull together all kinds of research. And exactly what it will look like, I do not know. It's basically a way to, we've had other types, it's basically a quick way of coordinating on research and information when there's an important, when there's an outbreak. Now we already have reference networks in the EU, we have all kinds of other, of course the ECDC has already played a role in this respect as well, but it's all a bit fragmented. So I think that the idea of this would be to pull together and to make it a more of a cohesive whole. But exactly what it will look like, I think we still have to see. And there's another quick question that I could answer. What have been the impacts of the EU health and economic support policies on the Green Deal and the climate change agenda? They probably have, just because of the available budget, but I'm not familiar of exactly what would be I'm not an insider on the Green Deal and the climate change agenda.
Okay, thank you so much, Anniek. And I was going to suggest that indeed we keep this very good question from Willy de Bakker, and good to have you on board,
really for the third seminar that we are going to organize at the end of January, which will specifically focus on the Green Deal. So really, you will just have to participate again. So Martin, there were 1 or 2 questions for you. So please.
Okay. I'm still just a little person in the corner. Is that how it's meant to be?
We see you on full screen and we hear you very well. Everything is fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, there were a couple of questions. Bela's question on the car industry, I tried to reply in writing and clicked on it and the whole thing disappeared. So I don't know if other people saw it.
It's there. We saw your answer. It's safely there. Absolutely.
Yeah, that it was the other way around, that Germany was the one substantial local manufacturer that had not recovered. I didn't read too much into it at the time because these things can vary from month to month. And Andreas Bart is rather implying that we will see that it's changed shortly afterwards. The significant point there is that production has come back and continued. It's an activity that is not locked down. There's the assumption that it can and that the pandemic will be under control by some other means. And that is an area in which they may or may not be proven right. Philippe asked the question, are we going to get back to how we were before? And I think I leave it as an open question of what returns, but also when it returns to how it was before. Less travel, is that a good thing? I suspect we will have more Zoom meetings. People will have found that that works satisfactorily and they really can't be bothered to travel everywhere. There will be more online shopping, but the rule of thumb that a lot of people give is if that was a trend that was underway anyway, you can expect it to continue. If it was not, if the trend was, if anything, in the other direction, then maybe we will go back sooner or later to where we were before. So we will go to pubs and restaurants again. We may well have more home working, and that may make a difference to how much people travel and how much people buy away from home. There may be long-term changes. Quite a lot, though, will eventually, maybe a year, 2 years from now, be heading back to where we were before. But I tried to avoid giving definite predictions. I tried to rely on what I could see had happened and let others make the predictions and the proposals for the future.
All right, thank you very much, Martin. Maybe we'll have some forward-looking activities in the panel discussion that will follow. In spite of the fact that we're running a few minutes late, I would like to propose that we take a 5-minute break, but really literally 5 minutes for coffee, sanitary, and other reasons. So meaning that we are back here and that we start with the panel discussion at 50 sharp. So that gives you 6 minutes, and I want to really thank Karen, Martin, and Anniek for this these excellent interventions and the very good discussion. Also, thank you to the audience for your very good questions. So we'll reassess in exactly 6 minutes from now. Thank you very much. In 6 minutes.
On n'entend pas, hein. Donc on vous voit, mais on n'entend pas.
Okay, I'll already make a little bit of noise here from the moderator's side. We will start again in 1 minute with Antoine Cazelle. We have Pelle Hilmersson, Margarita Arena, and of course, László Andor. So you start in 1 minute. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. After this very short, but in my case, much needed break, we have a lot of beef on the table brought on by the researchers, the authors of the book, and also the questions from the audience. And so we obviously thought, as we usually do, that it was a good idea or even essential to then ask policymakers their thoughts, as I already explained earlier on when Luca Visentini intervened. In fact, in the end, we write these books, this analysis for the policymakers, for people who can actually do something with this. So we hope this will happen also today. I will first give the floor to Antoine Cazelle, who is head of cabinet of Commissioner Nicolas Schmit. So it's good to have you, Antoine. We then have Pelle Hilmersson, who is Deputy General Secretary at the ETUC. So good to have you on board as well. Pelle, I hope I pronounced your name correct me if I'm not. We'll then have László Andor. Good to see you again, László. He's Secretary General now of FEPS and of course former European Commissioner for Social Affairs. And then we have Margarita Arena, who is Employment and Social Affairs Attaché, who is very busy managing the Portuguese presidency of the European Union that started about 12 days ago, no, exactly 12 days ago. So Margarita, also happy to have you on board in spite of your agenda. And that's true, of course, for all four of you. I can't promise Chatham House rules since all of this is being live streamed on Facebook, I think, or on YouTube. But still, I hope that we can have a frank discussion. That would be very helpful. Donc, je voudrais d'abord demander à Antoine Cazelle voilà, de démarrer ce panel avec votre feedback, soit sur les présentations des chapitres qu'on a entendus, soit d'autres éléments que vous avez vu apercevoir pendant la discussion et que vous estimez importants pour lancer le débat. Donc voilà, la parole est à vous. Pour le premier tour, s'il vous plaît, plus ou moins 5 minutes, et puis vous aurez l'occasion de revenir sur vos propos. La parole est à vous, Monsieur Cazelle.
Well, many thanks. I will talk in English because a lot of was said in English, and I think it would be more direct if I do like this. So many thanks for inviting me in this webinar, and also many thanks for these very impressive presentations. Thanks also for sharing the book. I have gone through the chapters. I've not read everything, but I have to say that this is very interesting, of course, for us. It's always useful actually when your actions are scrutinized and analyzed so that we can learn and better design future actions. And it's also good to see that we've been doing what we've been doing since the Juncker Commission is relatively assessed in a positive tone with an optimistic reading, as you have said. So it goes without saying that what we are facing for the moment is a very, very challenging situation. The COVID crisis has a very terrible impact on our lives. And it has also, as it was very much highlighted in the books and in the presentations, a very serious disruptive socioeconomic effect on our societies. Now, as several speakers have also said, we need to learn from our past mistakes and what we are going through to turn these challenges into opportunities, with a clear goal, as Luca also said, to redesign our social model in a better way. This crisis has shown many of our weaknesses, like all previous crises, and we learn from these weaknesses, hopefully. And it has also raised awareness of policymakers on a number of very much needed actions, measures, and reforms, which in the end will help us, hopefully, to do a more resilient European society. All of these needs, of course, to lead us to do better than we've done before. We always hear that we will get back to normal. Yes, we will get back, of course, to a normal life. This is clearly what everyone is wishing for 2021. But at the same time, our common goal should be also to build back better and aim also for what we all call a more human-centric society. So this is really what we have in mind in the Commission, and also what is at the heart of our action. And the crisis is clearly having a lot of impact on the way we live, the way we consume, the way we produce. It will surely accelerate also a number of novelties in our habits. But that being said, it's much too early to say how this normality will look like. Some say that people will travel less. It will be the other way around, that once we are back to normality, people will travel more because of the lockdowns and the fact that people were prevented from mobility. So we will see from that. So I'm not going to go through everything we've done so far, because I think you are very well informed by the different chapters that were presented in the book. But you know that the heart of our action was to act very swiftly, to do as much as we could, and also in our prerogatives. It was also highlighted that in certain areas, and especially health area, our prerogatives are limited. But that being said, we have done and proposed a number of initiatives that, of course, had and led the member states to take swift actions and implement swift actions. In the field of employment and social affairs, our immediate concern was to clearly do everything to maintain people in their jobs and mitigate the possible sharp rise in employment. And this is why we have encouraged member states to introduce these short-term work arrangements, which were not necessarily something that all member states were using. Some were already used to these kind of arrangements, but now we are happy to see that 27 member states have done so. And this had really clearly an impact also on the maintain of employment and on jobs. And we can see from the latest Eurostat statistics that unemployment still is at a relatively low pace. Now, that also being said, let's not fool ourselves. We have to prepare for a sharp rise in unemployment in the coming months, when these short-term work schemes will be lifted, and before the situation can improve again. And so this is where we will therefore need to think to other additional types of employment support measures that we can put in place in the framework of the recovery instruments that we have, and of course with the very strong budget that was adopted just before the end of the year, in order to stimulate employment transitions towards sectors in demands and the new jobs and the new frontier of work, that the future of work that is coming up. So we have to do this, and we have also to do it in order to prepare the workforce. We have to see how we can actually fill in the gaps in terms of mismatches that exist in the labor markets with new needs on the side of companies and consumers. And this will require most probably to revisit the employability of the European workforce in order to adapt to new jobs opportunities. And on the other hand, also to continue something which is very much at the heart of the Commission action since a long time ago, which is to deepen the internal market by removing unnecessary barriers. and develop, of course, true European industrial strategy that will allow to gradually boost the EU as an effective global player. And that will also be an occasion to export our green and especially also our social standards. And this is why my commissioner back in July has presented a very strong skills agenda and a youth employment support scheme in order to have and equip people, and especially the younger ones, with new skills and new tools to bridge this gap to new jobs. This will help our workforce to upskill, reskill, to match the needs of the green and digital transitions and to prepare for this new coming recovery and the next and what comes after next recovery. But the recovery must also address the poverty, to tackle vulnerabilities and inequalities. It was also said in the presentations, and there is a need there for strong economic and social convergence. The one goes with the other. It's extremely important that we continue working on convergence. Now, my last word, because I know time is running.
Thank you.
I know I can see that you have the little finger. So, what is our let's say our clear priority now, and the priority of my commissioner is clearly to present an action plan to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights. It was indicated that this pillar was adopted in Gothenburg, thanks to President Juncker and the Commission at the time. Now this pillar needs to be fully implemented. 20 principles we have already started. The previous Commission already started to implement the pillar. We have presented a proposal on the adequate minimum wage protection for workers. We have, as I already said, presented the skills agenda, and we will present initiatives where appropriate, respecting the principle of subsidiarity, obviously, on each of these principles. That will be done in the next weeks. And thanks to the Portuguese presidency, we will have a very important moment, the social summit in Porto, where there will be hopefully a very strong also social message from the leaders to the Europeans. And we very much count to work hand in hand with, of course, the Portuguese presidency to deliver this. Last thing, there will be nothing without a collective sense of having a common project. The European Union is a common project. And sometimes, I mean, the Commission can propose many things. If member states are not delivering and are not following, we cannot do it. And again, in the remit of our competences and limited prerogatives. So this sense of a collective project is extremely key. And hopefully we can get a well-functioning social market economy thanks to this collective will to progress together. And of course, with social partners, civil society, academics, this goes without saying. So brace yourself. This was only the beginning.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Cazel, for your sharp intervention, also underlining that the swift reaction, as you called it, from the Commission helped to contain the vast impact of this crisis. At the same time, we heard, I think, Martin saying that maybe the worst is yet to come. And in this context, I would like to maybe for discussion afterwards, a question I would like to put to you. What about return to austerity? Philippe and other speakers have pointed out that the question of when we return to austerity will be important, of course, for member states and how the EU can deal with this crisis. And there was a recent report from FEPS. I think there are one or two participants also from FEPS that pointed out that the question whether member states will indeed pick up the money from the recovery and resilience facility will be linked to the question of when austerity might be back on the agenda. So I will get back to you about that point. Also, I recently saw a signpost outside the European Parliament which said disappeared equal pay agenda. And I would like to pop you a question about that, equal pay directive. I would like to turn now, without any further ado, to Pelle Hilmersson from
Bart. Can I add one question also about medical professionals to Mr. Cazel? Because there's a
very brief. What's your question? Yes.
Yes, just if he can respond to that, especially in light of austerity measures, there will be there has already been a brain drain of medical professionals, and I was wondering if they are foreseeing any kind of policy in that area.
Right. Thank you very much for popping in. So Pelle Hilmersson from the ETUC, I want try to accommodate or introduce further than that. Any comments you may have on the chapters that have been presented, the book that you might have had a look at, even though you had to step in a little bit last minute, but please, your comments would be very welcome. Pelle.
Many thanks and congratulations to all involved in the timely publication of this book. I think we can all agree with what the book says, that during the past decade, there has been a shift in policy at EU level when it comes to social Europe. There have certainly been some lessons learned from the economic and financial crisis 10 years ago, that the EU can't focus only on fiscal discipline and competitiveness, but on sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Unfortunately, not enough of these lessons has been learned or turned into new policies and practice, because when the COVID-19 crisis hit, we saw how vulnerable and weak our societies have become due to the cuts made during the financial crisis, and how in particular health services around Europe never had recovered from the damaging impact of austerity policies, with the staff shortages, inadequate facilities and lack of investments. And this is also addressed in the book. It is therefore welcome with the 5 billion euro EU for Health program, which aims to improve the quality and the so-called resilience of European health systems. But to implement the objectives of this program, there needs to be enough qualified and well-paid healthcare workers in the member states, and social partners need to be involved in its implementation. And when it comes to the ideas to build up a European health union, it needs to be underpinned by the realization of the right to care and universal access to health and care, by adequate public funding, by adequate staffing levels and safe working conditions, by better pay for health and care workers, and by involvement of the social partners in the governance. Again, the question is if the EU and its member states have learned the lessons fully now and will implement the necessary policies and investments, and that's why this book is so interesting. If we look at the European labour markets, it's clear that they have deteriorated during the pandemic, and the burden has been carried by workers, especially non-standard workers, young and female workers, and the self-employed. But unemployment trends have not always followed the sharp decrease of economic activity, and this is mainly due to the role played by national job retention policies, such as short-time work schemes, as Antoine mentioned. And the SURE mechanism has been important to support these national efforts. And we look forward to the Commission drawing lessons from this and the proposals on a more permanent mechanism, the so-called European Unemployment Reinsurance Scheme. As argued in the book, the longer-term economic and social consequences of the pandemic are unclear, and will depend on the decisions taken at EU level. So it remains to be seen. But it is encouraging, at least, that the guiding stars this time, compared to the financial crisis, they shine brighter in terms of the need to aim for more sustainable and inclusive policies, supporting climate action, digital transformation, and social fairness. And here, the action plan on the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights is very important. The social pillar should be implemented fully to guarantee that European recovery is fair and inclusive, and that social policies are put on an equal footing with economic policies. As Luca Visentini mentioned in his intervention, EGC has welcomed the recovery plan and the MFF, which is a historic agreement with new ambitions never seen before. But it comes late in terms of support to workers hit by the pandemic. So there is an urgent need for member states to prolong support measures for short-time work schemes and support for self-employed and all other types of workers not normally covered by social protection schemes. And in delivering the recovery plan, the recovery and resilience facility is key, as also elaborated on in the book, where member states are now working on their national implementation plans. And for the ETUC, it's central that social partners are involved in the design and implementation of reforms and policies. And we're actively pushing for this because it makes sense. As previous crises has shown, countries with strong social dialogue systems, strong social partners, they manage economic shocks and difficulties better than others, and it helps creating more inclusive and sustainable growth. My last point would be on health and safety for workers. The COVID-19 pandemic is not only a public health issue, but very much an occupational health issue. The workplace provides fertile ground for the transmission of the virus. And if the EU and its member states fail to guarantee health and safety for all workers, it will be quite difficult to provide essential activities during lockdowns and to recover from the crisis. And the EU has already taken some important measures in this regard by including the COVID-19 virus in the Biological Agents Directive and issuing guidance for keeping workplaces safe. But more needs to be done. COVID-19 should be recognized as an occupational disease. We need EU legislation on work-related stress and on musculoskeletal disorders, which are on the rise because of the lockdowns. We need to address issues related to teleworking. We need better enforcement of existing health and safety standards by giving adequate resources to labor inspectorates and involving trade union safety representatives. These issues should be addressed in the upcoming EU health and safety work strategy, which the Commission is planning to present in a few months. The EU should also be active in pushing the International Labour Organization, ILO, in recognizing health and safety at work as a fundamental right, because this issue is obviously not only European, it's global. And if on this, if I may just finish with, because there was a question from a participant about the right of withdrawal of labor. I just wanted to say that this is a right guaranteed by an ILO convention and by the EU Framework Directive on Occupational Safety and Health from 1989. The right of withdrawal is an individual right, but in some member states, this right is linked with a collective right of safety representatives to undertake an investigation and propose further measures, such as in Sweden, France, and Belgium. And to my knowledge, it's in particular in these countries that this right has been used during the pandemic. Thank you.
Important points, and relating indeed the discussion about COVID-19 to the important topic of health and safety, which I admit is less prominent in this year's book. Let's see about what happens next year, but I'm very happy that that you brought in this important part of the debate. Thanks for that, Pelle. I'd like to turn to László now, László Andor. I've already introduced him if this were even needed, as in his new capacity of FEPS at FEPS, and of course you remember also László as a former commissioner. So many of these issues, of course, László, relate to the work that you are doing now, that you have been doing for a while. And so any comments, feedback, disagreement also on what has been said so far would be very much welcome. In about 5 minutes time. Please, László, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bart. First of all, thanks for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be with this conference and listen to the presentations and the interventions. I very much agree with the spirit of the conversation so far. I agree with the confidence, which is very much in the air. I think 2020 was a very tough year, but from the point of view of European solidarity, it was a major step forward. Don't forget that just 1 year ago, the EU almost adopted a budget, an MFF, in which the function of stabilization was represented by two ridiculous instruments amounting to about 60 billion euros. And that would have been the stabilization capacity for 7 years ahead. I'm so glad that this did not happen. And now we have a completely different financial framework, which allows for joint borrowing, which allows for cross-country transfers, and very importantly, it broke the 1% glass ceiling, because now the complete budgetary framework, the MFF and the next generation, goes up to 1.8% roughly of the total European GNI. This is good for a start, in my view. And there should be, obviously, in the coming years, further opportunities to revise this, because a lot depends on this also for social policy. So there is, I think, rightly confidence in the capacity to move ahead. Surely the Portuguese presidency will drive this with the highest possible speed. Nevertheless, I would like to highlight three reasons why the situation is still difficult. And one of the reasons for difficulty is, in my view, the Juncker legacy. The Juncker Commission had 5 years of uninterrupted growth. And while there is this phrase in English that you have to repair the roof while the sun is shining, the EMU was not repaired at all. Nothing in practice happened to improve the functioning of the monetary union. No new social safety nets were built. I think it's obviously true that this reluctance to develop the EU further, did not only apply to social policy. Somehow the Juncker Commission internalized EU skepticism after the 2014 elections, the breakthrough of various nationalist and populist forces in the European Parliament. So, they also abolished the climate and the environment portfolios. They had enlargement negotiations instead of enlargement. So in many ways, there was a kind of parade of proxy policies. And for example, in social policy, this substitute, which is a non-binding list of 20 principles, was supposed to cut the butter, which was adopted in an informal setting in Gothenburg. And it was so unproblematic that even Mr. Orban signed it, the greatest enemy of social Europe, because there was no threat that this would challenge his anti-social policies. I think at the time of the Portuguese presidency, it's worthwhile mentioning that the Juncker Commission practically buried the legacy of the Lisbon strategy, which is very importantly linking social objectives to targets and resources. And without targets and resources, social policy is hot air. And that's why it's very important that the von der Leyen Commission is reconnecting social policy in this way with targets as well as resources. That I think is the approach that should be recommended. The other threat, in my view, which is also very serious and not simply legacy, the so-called frugal countries. And we saw them in action in 2020 really massively, at least in two fronts. Number one, of course, trying to undermine the power of the new budgetary framework in various ways, but also practically opposing everything which would facilitate social convergence. So this is a bit of a paradox that the countries which are most advanced in terms of industrial relations and welfare safety nets, they are the ones who block the European Union's development of policies that would support social convergence. Look at the famous debate about the minimum wage. Left and right in the Nordic countries continues to oppose what is badly needed for tackling in-work poverty and social convergence. There was a question about the Brexit. Of course, the fact that the UK withdrew from the European Union makes a difference. I think, for example, launching the Labour Authority would not have happened before the Brexit referendum, but in itself, it's definitely not sufficient. And let me obviously mention the third threat, which is the atrocious governments in Central Europe, Orban and his Polish friends, who have been very frequently criticized in the area of rule of law, but not sufficiently criticized for the so-called anti-social policies. The fact that, for example, in Hungary, unemployment benefit only applies to 90 days. And I think, the credibility of the European Union would be much stronger in these countries had the criticism from the EU would also go against, for example, the slave labor law in Hungary, which clearly is against the Working Time Directive, but the Juncker Commission failed to challenge this. They just brushed this under the carpet. Sidelining the whole Roma issue, on which we worked a lot with Viviane Reding, but despite this is the heaviest social problem in the poorest countries of the European Union, Roma exclusion. And then in the past 5 years, we heard practically nothing from the European Commission about it, and it would be obviously time to return to those. So agreeing with colleagues who spoke, I do believe that there is a lot of mileage in the health union. I agree that occupational safety and health should be connected with this for the sake of the essential workers and many others. Unemployment reinsurance is timely, and it is also a promise. So it's, this promise should be delivered. Plus very important proposals like the child guarantee, which have also been on the table. Of course, it's not so much a trade union issue, but even if we are in trade union circles, we should also pay attention to other aspects of social policies, especially child policy, which would need a boost at the European level as well. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, László, for your, what I would call a sobering view on the advancements made so far. So yeah, I don't think you rejected the optimistic view that has been exposed so far, but at the same time, I think you rightly point to some major issues that are still out there. My question to you for a bit later in the discussion, or a short discussion that we will have, would be when you refer to the fact that the EU has not addressed the behavior or the policies, the anti-social policies of certain member states. My question to you would be, what could the EU do in this respect? I don't think you're referring to an open method or coordination or something in the semester, but then what? What instruments would be available for the EU? Now, Margarita Aranha, I would like to give you the floor. You're working with the Portuguese presidency. A lot of references have been made already to the Portuguese presidency. High hopes, references to Porto, the social summit that is upcoming. You're going to do great things with the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights, etc. So please, in a few minutes, your stake and your feedback on what has been said so far. Margarita.
Thank you, Bart, and thank you for the opportunity. Unfortunately, our Deputy Permanent Representative, Ambassador Pedro Lurti, could not participate today, but it's an honor for me to represent here the Portuguese presidency. And as you said, Bart, very well, I'm in very good company this afternoon. This exchange has been very interesting, and it's a great privilege to be part of this, to assist to participate on this exchange and to assist to the comments, both the actors and the panel that we are now initiating. We believe that the message of the Portuguese presidency fits very well and very timely on the concerns that have been presented today. And I wanted to highlight that our priority is to lead the European economy in the path of recovery and growth, making it future-proof, and to lead the twin transitions, digital and green, towards a fairer, green and resilient union, while leaving no one behind. This means Europe must remain inclusive, and it also means enhancing global solidarity and partnership by building bridges. By saying this, the 5 priorities set for the Portuguese presidency can be briefly described by 5 keywords: resilience, social, green, digital, and global. Resilient Europe will guide us that the recovering Europe's economy, while enhancing solidarity and values, namely through economic recovery, the recovery and the resilience national plans, investment and open strategic autonomy, while promoting a competitive industrial sector. The social Europe means that we will work on strengthening Europe's social dimension as a response to the crisis and for inclusive growth. This means preserving the European social model and strengthening cooperation in the health sector. The European Social Summit, as already mentioned, that it's planned for May, beginning of May, will be the key event to take forward this priority. Green Europe, the Portuguese presidency intends to pursue the European Green Deal towards a climate neutral and environmental sustainable economy, namely by the implementation of the European Green Deal and the Circular Economy Strategy. And the Digital Europe we intend to develop the data economy, connectivity, and values for equitable, human-centric, and competitive digital society as crucial drivers for the economic recovery while ensuring the European digital autonomy. Global Europe, the last but not the least, we intend to strengthening multilateralism, partnerships, and Europe's role in the global world. For these 5 key ambitions, the social dimension has a big role, and we have very concrete priorities regarding employment and labor markets to contribute to strengthen the employability and the decent work, guarantee household incomes in the process. And in the context of the pandemic, it is very urgent to show workers that policymakers are on their side, providing the instruments to protect them, to fight in-work poverty, to give an answer to the rising unemployment levels. Also, we will fight and work for more comprehensive and thoughtful social policies so that they are a key to tackle poverty, social exclusion, and social inequalities. We also believe that we need to reaffirm the vision on our social model and that social policies need to be the answer for demographic challenges and fostering social and territorial cohesion, but also to be on the side of everybody, of all the citizens. Last but not least, the dimension of the gender equality that would assess violence against women and domestic violence, but also better conditions and to work for better working conditions regarding the pay and a more even and equal treatment. It is important to highlight that our central line, our action central line will be the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. We have firmly believe that the building a fair and social Europe depends on placing the European Pillar of Social Rights at the center of the European recovery. Portugal, as a presidency, will spare no effort in the implementation of the European Pillar and its action plan. We need to deliver. That's our motto. We cannot lose sight of the enormous challenge before us, and we need to reinforce and carry on building a more social, resilient, fairer, and more inclusive Europe. On this context, and highlighting the organization of the Porto Social Summit on the 7th and 8th of May, this event will provide political impetus for the implementation of the pillar based on the action plan that the Commission will present early this year, and it will also be the opportunity to strengthen the dialogue with social partners and civil society. It is our message today, Bart. Again, thank you for this opportunity, and I'm here for all answers that the participants want to raise to the Portuguese presidency.
Okay, thank you very much, Margarita, for highlighting the important work of the presidency. Clearly, you have a lot on your plate. I admit that I don't quite understand what open strategic autonomy is, but I've seen it coming up in several texts, so maybe it's up to me to understand it better. We won't have a lot of time to discuss it today. I already hinted at 2 questions for Antoine and for László. I don't know if there are other questions out there, just let us know. So Antoine, maybe very briefly, because as always, of course, time is too short, return to austerity. It's an issue that pops up more and more regularly, also in academic debates, but also politically, of course, linked to the recovery fund. There was a quick question from Anniek about health professionals and brain drain. Any EU initiatives in this domain? And then to László, as I hinted before, you suggested that the EU should maybe step up its efforts with regard to anti-social policies of certain member states.
This, of course, brings us to the issue of EU competencies, hard governance, soft law, all that. What could the EU, in your view, do more than it does now? So, Antoine, maybe you want to start, and then let's see if there are some other questions. I think Slavina Spasova, one of the co-editors, would also like to raise a question. Antoine, briefly, please.
Yes, many thanks. So on austerity, I mean, I've started my presentation or my intervention by saying that we should learn from from our mistakes and from the past experience, and of course from the scrutinies and examination that we have been facing, and especially from your side. So I think it would be the time will come when we will have to look at on how, especially fiscal rules and fiscal discipline should be returning to a certain normality. But I wouldn't imagine that this could be done without, and this has also been announced, reviewing the rules that are applying currently in the system, and also learning from what we have done a couple of years ago and the consequences from that. So I will not anticipate this debate here, because this is this is not in my remit nor my competences to anticipate this debate. This debate will come sooner than we think, but on a personal basis, I cannot imagine that we will replug rules which can actually have an impact also on the investments that we are trying to inject through the recovery in order to build back a better economy. So we will have to find a right balance between, of course, having rules, having discipline, but at the same time also having the possibility to do these investments, and in particular, as you can imagine, in the social field. Now, on the medical sector, this is again something which is out of my remit, but still, I would like to answer the question. We will, of course, through the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan, present a number of actions also in the fields of healthcare. We are not doing this plan in a silo. We are doing this with other commissioners, and especially the health commissioners, but also the commissioners for equality. And this is also, by the way, to answer the question that you have raised, because I don't want to escape questions by the Pay Transparency Directive. Yes. This is from Commissioner Dalli. So we are working with Commissioner Dalli. This is not in our remit, but obviously there has been delays, and we cannot contest that there has been delays. And we hope that we can produce this proposal as rapidly as possible this year. So just to also not escape that one. On the droit de retrait, or the withdrawal right, it has been answered, I think, already. So I don't have much to say. I don't have more statistics, by the way, to produce. Just to coming back on the healthcare worker, it is clear that I couldn't there also imagine that reforms and investments in the healthcare systems, and of course also in the frontline workers that has shown so much strength during the 2020, that we would not learn from this by also there producing sufficient investment also in this workforce. And by the way, this is also linked to the pillar with social dialogue, collective bargaining agreements, and of course the adequate minimum wage protection directive that we have proposed. Voilà, I stop here.
Yes, thank you very much, Antoine. László, would you like to jump in at this stage?
Yes, just a few points to your question. Of course, the working time directive is not soft law. So where there is a violation, it is possible, and it is, in my view, an obligation to challenge the violations. It will be also a question whether the lockdown and the COVID and various extraordinary situations in 2020 represent an excuse or not. When EU labor law is violated, to my knowledge, there was a suspension of the fiscal rules and the competition rules, but not the labor law. And this also would need to be looked at across the board, in my view. But there are other areas as well where I think, let's say, inaction is striking. The social fund and other European funds being diverted from their original purpose at daylight in various ways is common knowledge. And for example, I mentioned Roma integration. the funds that were meant to support Roma integration being diverted is something where there's no need for new treaty or new law. Under the existing rules, it's possible to stamp out the abuse of EU money, in my view, and it has just been not happening.
Thank you very much, László. There is a question in the Q&A that I would like to put to Pelle. A question from Willy de Bakker. Where do the trade unions stand on the issue of large public deficits and how to deal with them? Are they open to the new ideas of I'm not familiar, Mazzucato and Stephanie Kelton? You can think 2 or 3 seconds about this, Pelle. So the question is also in the Q&A. And I think Slavina Spasova also had a question.
Yes, thank you very much for these very insightful presentations. I have a question to Monsieur Cazel. What happened to the idea of the European unemployment benefit scheme? If I remember well, in the proposal of the Commission on the SURE benefit, there was some mention of the European unemployment benefit scheme, which disappeared in the final version of the text. So could you tell us where we stand?
And since Antoine will have to intervene again, I might as well add a question from Dominique Afsharian in the Q&A on Zoom, who asks, how would you estimate the chances of the measures introduced via Next Generation EU to result in a permanent instrument, particularly considering the own resources of the European Commission? Without leading us too far, because we are really running out of time, I'd like to get to the conclusions of this panel, but still some reflections on this would be most welcome. But maybe, Pelle, we can first turn to you. Where do the trade unions stand on the issue of large public deficits and how to deal with them? Question from Willy de Bakker. Pelle, would you like to come in briefly?
Yes, very briefly. Well, I think we see an opportunity here. Luca said it earlier, and I said it as well, the historic deal with the recovery plan and MFF with a common debt issuance, which could possibly and hopefully lead to common debt management, especially in the Eurozone. Of course, it's very welcome with the measures taken already to suspend fiscal rules, not to add on the debt, and like the SURE mechanism also helps member states to keep down their debts. So we need to draw the lessons from this and build on the emergency measures taken and see if we can make them more permanent. As I got the word, I just wanted to have a short say on the healthcare professionals. EU has limited competences, but can do a bit about recruitment and retention of medical personnel. It has already proposed to support transfer of medical workers between the countries to address staff shortages. But more should be done to make this profession more attractive for EU citizens, because it's not sustainable to rely on migration of nurses and doctors from third countries, as this also causes a brain drain in these sending countries. So more should be done to facilitate access to education, and the European Commission can assist by improving occupational health and safety, or working in care, in particular by tackling work-related cancer and stress.
Pelle, I receive a comment in the meanwhile from Andreas Bosch, who says, Mazzucato and Kelton are really worth reading, Bart. Yes, I will remember that. And in the meanwhile, I can already pronounce the names. I'd like to get back to Antoine now. There were several questions addressed to you. Please be very brief in your response.
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, the question of an unemployment benefit scheme is obviously still something on which we are working. We have been through the crisis that we have been describing in this seminar and commenting in this webinar. It is clear that if we would have now the possibility and the political momentum to work on this and to present this, we would have done so. The fact is, there were other, unfortunately, priorities that came in the picture. That doesn't mean that this important issue is not still on the agenda. It's still in the mission letter of my commissioner, still in the mission letter of Mr. Commissioner Gentiloni. And so we will, of course, continue to work on this, but one has to be also looking at the political momentum of things. and we would have presented this maybe last year at the same time as SURE, for example. I'm not sure that SURE would have been a SURE. so to put it like this. So we will see, and we will of course continue to work on this. This is clearly also something that I can tell you. Now, if this will lead to a permanent mechanism financed by own resources, all of this of course needs to be assessed at the right moment and with the right people. But we will work on these issues definitely. Is that it, or you have another question? I forgot if there is another.
No, I think that's fine for now. Yeah, no, that's very good. Okay, thank you very much. I think we can wrap it up here. It's also it's time to wrap it up. So I would really like to thank László, Margarida, Antoine, and Pele for a very interesting discussion. Very good comments. Also, this is very helpful. Also for us as editors, and I think also for the authors of the chapters. And Margarida, I'm sure that we will, because we didn't have a lot of chance to discuss the presidency, but I'm sure that there will be other occasions to exchange views, and I really look forward to that. So thank you to the four of you for your presence during this debate. So we come to the very final bit of this conference, the book presentation. The concluding remarks by my co-editors, Boris Frontedou and Slavina Spasova from the European Social Observatory. So without further ado, I think I'll first leave the floor to Boris. You will speak first, please. Go ahead, Boris. And just to confirm to those of you who are online, we are looking at 15 more minutes and then we wrap up the event. Boris, please.
Oui, donc merci Bart. Donc je vais tenter d'apporter quelques éléments de conclusion à ce débat déjà très dense. Je vais surtout me concentrer sur les aspects relatifs à la santé, et puis Slavina poursuivra avec des éléments plus transversaux et plus prospectifs. Donc tout d'abord, ce que je pense important à souligner, c'est qu'en décrétant des mesures de confinement généralisées, les États membres et la Commission, par le biais de recommandations, ont placé la santé au-dessus de l'impératif de croissance économique. Ça s'est également vu dans les recommandations par pays qui ont été publiées dans le cadre du semestre européen en mai 2020 et qui contenaient des recommandations à l'intention de l'ensemble des États membres pour renforcer les systèmes de soins de santé nationaux. Et ça, c'est clairement une rupture avec les tendances qui avaient été observées par le passé, puisque entre 2011 et 2018, la Commission a formulé plus de 60 recommandations à l'attention des États membres pour qu'ils coupent dans les budgets des soins de santé ou qu'ils privatisent partiellement certains services sanitaires. Dans le même temps, le relâchement des règles budgétaires, on en a parlé, et la nouvelle ligne de crédit du mécanisme européen de stabilité, Pandemic Crisis Support, ouvre des perspectives encourageantes pour le renforcement des systèmes de soins de santé nationaux sur le long terme. Donc, on a également mentionné le programme EU4Health, qui est, d'un point de vue budgétaire, le plus ambitieux jamais lancé à l'échelle européenne, mais pour autant, dont le succès n'est pas encore assuré, puisque donc, on en a largement débattu, l'établissement d'un système de réponse réactif et coordonné qui n'interférera pas avec les compétences des États membres se révélera être une tâche particulièrement délicate pour la Commission. Et à ce titre, les actuelles négociations pour l'achat des vaccins et la répartition des vaccins par pays constituent, je pense, un test crucial pour la Commission concernant sa capacité à agir en tant qu'acteur privilégié des États pour la gestion des crises sanitaires. La réussite donc de ce programme EU4Health dépendra également bien de la manière dont seront alloués ces fonds et de la capacité de la Commission à établir des stratégies transversales en accord avec les autres stratégies à long terme de l'Union européenne, dont le plan de relance par le biais d'Horizon Europe et le Green Deal européen, pour faire face aux défis qui attendent l'Union européenne à l'avenir, dont notamment la crise climatique, la résistance antimicrobienne, le vieillissement de la population, etc. Donc dans ce livre, Éloi Laurent, qui a rédigé un chapitre sur le Green Deal, souligne la nécessité de placer la santé au cœur des politiques publiques et l'environnement au cœur de la santé, parce que la santé donc, est considérée comme l'interface clé entre les personnes et la biodiversité. Et donc je terminerai en soulignant que donc, au début de son mandat, la présidente de la Commission européenne a souligné que la durabilité serait au cœur de toutes les politiques européennes et la santé en est un composant essentiel et elle devra donc rester en haut de l'agenda politique. Il reste juste à voir si les États membres pourront tirer des enseignements de la pandémie, mais les années qui ont suivi la crise financière de 2008 nous laissent un peu penser le contraire. Pour creuser un peu ces questions, je vais maintenant passer la parole à ma collègue Slavina. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Boris. Slavina.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, and many thanks to all of you for this engaging and thought-provoking debate. I will focus on the conclusions on two main points. The first one is articulated around two words. So I will try to conclude our book around only two words. And then I will present some forward-looking points of the book. I believe in the power of words, and given the gloomy context, I chose two words with a rather optimistic connotation. The first one is solidarity. It was already mentioned by László Andor. Not in a romantic or idealized sense, but in its core meaning of communion of interests and responsibility, mutual responsibility. In this sense, solidarity between EU institutions and between the member states, we believe, was essential during this crisis. Though it was not at all evident at the start of the pandemic, as the shadow of the management of the 2008 crisis was looming large. During the presentation, I remember of the previous edition of the Bilan book in mid-March 2020, we were many to be pessimistic about the EU's response to the crisis. Nevertheless, we should recognize now that the long and exacerbating debates in the European Council resulted in solidaristic initiatives which took shape in 3 stages within a very short time span. I will mention only some of them because we already discussed many of them. So this first stage in March 2020 was about relaxing some sacrosanct EU rules, such as such as those on state aid, as well as the unprecedented use of the general escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact. The second stage, in April 2020, their efforts focused on the creation of 3 financial firewalls. And here we already discussed the SURE mechanism, which was qualified by Karen and Elke in this book as a quantum leap of the European social policies. And then the third stage, we discussed it already quite a lot, was marked by the establishment of the new generation EU, as well as the hard-fought 21-27 EU budget. Both the mind-boggling amounts involved have been qualified by many as a historic step towards economic recovery. As far as healthcare policies are concerned, I won't repeat what Boris just said, but we could say that we observed the development of solidarity through crisification. And we borrow this term crisification from an eponymous academic article. You can find the reference in our book. Crisification refers here to the importance of the crisis-oriented methods, such as early warning systems and shortcut decision-making procedures for arriving at collective decisions. The crisification dimension here was very clear in the good performance of the European Center for disease prevention and control, as well as in the creation of the new systems that Anniek already mentioned in her presentation. Building solidarity through crisification is also articulated in the discourse on European Health Union, which is justified by the need for rapid decision-making and the need to embed foresight in health policies. And this last example brings me to the second word that marks this book, which is vision. Vision, here we would like to refer to the ambitious strategy of the new European Commission in the social area, which was already discussed largely in the debate, building on the strong legacy of the Juncker Commission. In our view, the Commission's agency was among the key factors that prevented this crisis from taking an intergovernmental turn, as was the case 10 years ago in the aftermath of the 2008 crisis. Despite the pandemic, as we already heard, the Commission followed through several of the ambitious policies from its work program, for example, concerning minimum wages. Even more importantly, the Commission's driving role during the crisis was essential. We discussed it. Let me just mention, as I already asked Monsieur Cazel, the initial proposals on the SURE mechanism, the Next Generation EU, which were quite ambitious but downsized in the COSIO. So, two words, solidarity and vision, during the hard months of the pandemic in 2020. Now that we reached the end of this event, the question is, what is next? Let me very briefly flag a few issues in the social domain, which are to be followed closely in the next months. First, the social consequences of the digital transitions and especially the Digital Services Act and the Platform Work Summit. Second, last week, the Commission launched an inception impact assessment on collective bargaining agreements for self-employed and the scope of application of competition rules. Looking into how the sacrosanct EU competition rules may hinder collective bargaining of the self-employed is a significant step already, which may have important impact on platform work. Third, there are some key initiatives in the realm of social protection to be followed, such as the monitoring of the 2019 Council recommendation on access to social protection and the difficult negotiations about the coordination of social security systems. We also heard about maybe the future of certain European unemployment benefit schemes. Let's see. Another fourth point is linked to the first ever EU report on impact on demographic change. And here the COVID pandemic, we didn't talk during this debate, but the COVID pandemic shed light on significant issues and some dramatic situations in long-term care facilities. In this context, there are some signs we believe we observe that we could expect a future initiative on long-term care for the elderly. And let's hope this will be the case. And last but not least, we will follow closely the development of the action plan on the pillar. To conclude on what is next, rather than perceiving this crisis as a window of opportunity that we also mention in our conclusions, it would seem more appropriate to talk about the critical juncture. This is namely a situation of a great uncertainty in which the decisions of important actors are decisive for the selection of one institutional development over other possible paths. So the question, and we had already some responses, is which actors will be involved and what path will be chosen. As we discussed, the EU chose to table unprecedented and ambitious measures, and others are in the pipeline. In this context, we want to underline that it is essential to stress that not only the design of the policies matters, but also their philosophical underpinnings. The crisis highlighted strikingly significant gaps and inequalities in social protection and social inclusion systems even in the most affluent democracies. We heard during this discussion criticism regarding several issues underlying these measures about the aspired upward convergence between member states regarding the capacity to effectively absorb the money on the table, concerning also the evaluation of national recovery policies. And crucially, the question was raised, are we going back to conditionality and to austerity policies at one point? It was repeated several times that the things will never be the same again. It is therefore on the philosophical underpinnings and the design of the post-COVID labor market, social protection and social inclusion policies that the peaceful existence of national and European institutions will depend. We all observe very recently how fragile democracies are. In this context, progressive measures, which weren't mentioned here, such as the rule of law conditionality, which was watered down, but still are essential, the rule of law conditionality attached to the MFF. And our very final message to the stakeholders around the table is that in the coming years, we should not be afraid of philosophical and ideological debates over the social dimension of the EU in the light of the green and digital transitions and demographic challenge. This will include difficult questions and choices about ecological winners and losers, and the EU's fiscal capacity, taxation of platforms, intergenerational fairness, gender equality, and migration. Many thanks for your virtual attention, and I hope you will read our book. Thanks.
Un grand merci à Boris et Slavina. Thank you for flagging the key issues of our conclusions in the book, but also of today's debates. So in the last 60 seconds of this conference today, I just want to mention that when I read these conclusions, it seems a bit like an invitation to start working on the next edition of this book. But let's see about that. That's of course ETUI's call. We need to let you go now. You need time now to start reading the book, which is available online. Let me just flag that we are organizing two more conferences, two more launch events for this book, more focused on particular topics. We have a second webinar on the 22nd of January next week on gender equality and in-work poverty, where we will continue the discussion, including on the Equal Pay Directive, I suppose. There's a third webinar on the 28th of January, where we will be focusing on the European Green Deal, the EU Sustainable Development Strategy, etc., where we will be expecting Willy de Bakker again, of course, with very good questions. So thank you again to all speakers on behalf of ETUI. Philippe, thanks again to you and your team for hosting us today and making all this technically possible. A lot of work has gone into this, and I'm really very happy about that. I hope you enjoyed this afternoon as much as we did. By the way, I received a chat also that Mariana Mazzacuto, I hope I got her name right this time, will be the keynote speaker even on an ETUI event, during an ETUI event on the 3rd of February. You might want to check that out. I will do that in any case. So we hope that you stay in touch. If you want to send us any feedback on this event or on the book, we would be really happy with that. We stay in touch. Stay safe and goodbye for now. Thank you very much.